Okay, this is Jane asking the questions. The question that we want to talk about is tell us something about each child that, like a memory that you have that maybe the child doesn't is too young to remember, or something about their personality, things like that. So let's start with Nancy.
Let's start with Nancy. Well, Nancy was obviously our firstborn, and we had to really wait a long time. She was quite late in coming. That's what I remember. Her due date was October 6th.
Oh my
And
goodness.
she wasn't born till about 2.5 weeks later on the 24th. So I always figured she was given that extra time to really get some good instructions on the other side to prepare her for her duty as the oldest in the family, which she carried out very well. We lived in the Avalon Apartments in Idaho Falls. We had only moved back from Provo, or moved from Provo to Idaho Falls. Been there just a month or so before she was born, about 6 weeks or so. Do you remember those
Yeah,
days in the Avalon?
We lived in the basement apartment. It was kind of first level, but sort of underground a little bit. And we had, it was a very, very fascinating time. One of the things I remember is about a year later, we moved back to Bloomington, Indiana, where I got my MBA. And the first winter we were there, so that would have been December of 1959. So she would have been a year and 3 or 4 months old. We took the train back from Indiana all the way to Idaho Falls to spend Christmas. And that's a long train ride from there. I remember on one of the long stretches, I think from Omaha or someplace we were going, and Nancy was walking pretty well, not 100%, but she was always wanting to walk, and she was walking down the aisle, and the train kind of lurched a little bit around a corner. She kind of started to fall over, and there was a Japanese military officer that was here taking some training. He caught her, and it was only just 2 or 3 rows ahead of us, and I went running down, and he says, "Oh, it's fine, I've got her." He spoke really good English. And anyway, she just took a liking to him, and he took a liking to her, and it was hard to kind of get her away. I just remember how happy he was. He said, "It reminds me of my daughter."
That's
that
cool.
he'd left back in Japan. And anyway, that's one of my memories, was how she wasn't afraid at all. She was just fine with him, taking her. And he had an empty seat. She sat there by him for a while, and we eventually got him back. I think he got off in Denver or someplace like that.
Oh, that's a fun memory.
Speaking of Nancy walking, I remember she took her first steps, independent steps, in Brown County that autumn.
Indiana.
Yes, Indiana, and we had gone with our friends, the Driggs, for a little outing to the forest, or it was where all the fall leaves were, and it was in Brown County. It was really beautiful, and she decided she would be independent walker then. We have a cute picture. We'll have to try to get that out of her taking those first steps. But back before Indiana, while we were still in the Avalon apartment, there in Idaho Falls. Try again.
Okay,
Here we
take
are.
2.
Take 2. Okay. I wanted to add in about when we were living in the Avalon Apartments. The manager of the apartments was an elderly woman, a very interesting lady, and she took quite an interest in having a young baby in the apartments, because it was mostly singles or older people living there. and she would often give me advice of how to be a mother and stuff. She had, I don't remember, a couple of kids and a fairly hard life. Her husband had been a truck driver. And I remember one time she was telling me, she said, now, I learned early on that to always be ready. When your husband asks you to go someplace, just be ready and go. Don't turn him down, because if you turn him down, he just might not ask you again. He said, I always had a diaper bag packed and ready. If he wanted me to go on a ride with him, I could grab the baby in the diaper bag and we could go. I thought that was quite good counsel. I tried to kind of remember that and always be willing and happy to accept invitations. Another thing, we were members of this Idaho Falls 6th Ward when we lived there. And both of us were called to serve in the MIA, the Young Women's, Young Men's. And that meant quite a few late night meetings and weeknight meetings. And Nancy would just go along with us and kind of got in the habit of staying up late. You remember that? We were at a ward banquet one night, and I was holding Nancy on my lap, just eating the meal, and they had the tables all, long tables set up. One of the older brothers in the ward came up to me and just started talking and playing with Nancy, and she was responding so cute as she sat there on my lap, and he got real nostalgic, and he said, you know, I think if I had it all to do over again, and this couple was very active and good members of the ward, but they had never had children, and he just responded so well to Nancy, and he said, if I had it all to do over again, I think I might divorce a woman who wouldn't be willing to adopt if we couldn't have our own. That was a very poignant thought, and Nancy was very much a part of that conversation.
I remember back in Indiana, we had a little rocking chair that Nancy loved to get in the rocking chair, and she loved to hold the Wall Street Journal, pretend like,
goodness.
I mean, she wasn't reading, but, you know, I'd give her other things, and, oh, I want the
church news, too.
the church news, yeah. She would just hold them. She, of course, couldn't read, but it was interesting that really kept her attention.
Yeah, she was pretending. In fact, she really did learn to read quite early on. When we got back after Indiana to Idaho Falls, I think it was after Liz was born, and I was nursing Liz sitting in the armchair, and she brought me a paper and pencil and said, would I write the names of the family, Grandma, Grandpa, Mama, Daddy, Liz, and her name. And she learned to read first from the names of the family members. She could recognize them quite readily, and that was her first reading, but she did learn to read and loved to read early on. In fact, she used to love maps. She used to sit with her dad and learn different places on maps, and didn't she major and take a lot of geography classes?
Yeah.
So that started early too, that interest.
All right.
In Tonga, she helped out in the mission office quite a lot.
Yeah. She was always helping the elders. In those days, they didn't have checking accounts, so everything was done in cash. And it was shillings, pence, and pounds, and things like that. So she would help the elders count the tithing and count the fast offering and make the deposit slips and so forth.
Yeah, she was really good at that British style of money there. She caught on fast.
Well, we better move on to Liz.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, let's go on to Liz now.
Are we
Yeah,
on?
yeah.
Okay. Liz was born on October 6th, Nancy's original due date. So that
Was Liz
started
late?
I think it was pretty close.
I think she was
just
due on the 5th,
I
and she
think
was born on the 6th.
or just a day or two early. I
Yeah.
can't remember for sure. It's funny how you remember the details more of your first and your last, at least I do. But, yeah, Liz was always, seemed to just respond so well to the rhythm of music and the wind even. We used to love to watch her just dancing out in the yard. I'd look out the kitchen window and she'd be just in her own little world, responding to the nature around her and the breezes and dancing like a little fairy. Almost loved music and the feel that it brought early on.
I remember in Tonga how she used to love to listen to music, and we had a set of earphones, you know, those big with the, and if there was ever a problem or something, we would just say, "Do you want to listen to some music?" Yeah, and she'd jump up on the chair and put these big headphones on her, about as big as she was at the time. But I have the same memory. She was always moving, always doing things, you know, kind of either dancing or running or singing. It was obvious from early on that she loved music, and it was, so that's kind of my recollection, was how you know, she was really hard to get her to sit still unless you put the earphones on her.
This is from our little, we'll refer quite often to this booklet that we did years ago, Out of the Mouths of the Groberg Babes. This is kind of a fun one. Nancy was told that she had to share her pie. This was in October of '61, so Liz was just a year old and Nancy 3, I guess. And we had pie for dessert. Nancy was told she had to share her pie with Liz. And she gave her a few bites, but not very much. And then afterwards, Nancy went to Dad and said, "Can I have some ice cream?" And Dad says, "Well, tell Mom you can have as much ice cream as Liz had pie." So she came up to me and she said, "Mama, give Liz some more pie." That was about the same time that Nancy came up and proudly said that she had just given Liz a haircut. She had received some scissors, little kid scissors, and I guess Liz had been a patient little patron, and she had it kind of snipped right up the front there, pretty close to her skin.
Yeah, Liz was, she probably remembers this, or maybe doesn't, but it was just shortly after we came back from Tonga. In fact, I think just a month or two afterwards. And one evening, she was, I don't think it was during the night, I think she had been taking a nap or something, and she kind of cried out and said, "Hey, something's wrong," or something like that. And I went and she was bleeding from her ears and from her nose and from her mouth. And of course we just immediately grabbed Liz and ran her to the hospital, to the emergency room. And while they were running the tests, the doctor turned them over to someone else to run the tests. And he came, I remember so well, he came and he says, "Well, I don't know if you were with us, or maybe I took her on my own. I can't remember."
I was there.
Yeah, okay. Then he said, "Well, John and Jean, you have to be prepared. It has every sign of possible leukemia, just bleeding all over." And I said, "Well, what did the test say?" "Well, we don't know yet, but I just wanted to prepare you." And then about 15 or 20 minutes later, he came back with the doctor and my Uncle Morris was a radiologist there, and they had done some x-rays and things. And came back and said, "Oh, it's nothing that serious. It's serious, but it's nothing it's not life-threatening." I don't even remember what they said there was. It was just something from being down at low sea level and then coming back to high pressure or something. Anyway, it just passed, and that was that. And of course, our prayers and faith were with her. And even though he kind of scared us, the doctor scared us, I always had kind of a confidence. No, she's gonna be all right, and she was.
Yeah.
She was a little, how old was she then? I think it was a while after we'd been back. but
Yeah, not very long.
I'll have to check that one out. Liz started saying her prayers all by herself when she was about, let's see, May of '63, so that would have been 2.5.
She's born in
No,
October of 60.
it was a year before I was born, because I was born
Okay.
in '64. Marilyn would have been a year, so
So she'd been 3.5.
3.
Three.
Yeah.
Okay. And one I recorded her little first prayer all by herself. Father in heaven, thank for this nice day. Bless Marilyn, Elizabeth, Daddy, Mama, Nancy. Bless Uncle D in Japan. Bless us to eat. Bless us to be good girls. Bless all our loved ones. Bless us to be a good bishop. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. So you can tell what their dad's role was at that time. Also, about that age, I think it was her 3rd birthday, Aunt Barbara gave her a cute little cotton dress. As I recall, it was a kind of a black and red print of some sort. And when she opened the package, there was a little family party there. And, oh, that's pretty. She held it up, and one of the aunts said, oh, what a nice fall dress, because it was October. And then Aunt Barbara said, well, what are you going to do with it, Lizzie? And she said, I will go falling in it. And, I think she was referring to our falling parties, that we would gather the leaves up and throw everyone in the pile of leaves. That was her falling dress from then on. And she also, about that age, was telling her own version of a favorite story of Cinderella. She said Cinderella was crying. She wanted to go to a ball game.
That's fun.
Yeah, all right. You have anything else
Oh,
on this?
well, when she was about 3.5, back again to how she was always so what do you call it, athletic in a way,
Just active, yeah.
active and nimble. And she said, look, I can almost do a carpet wheel.
And then she had something, I remember you said something about learning to teach, or she was gonna be a teacher or
Oh,
something.
yes. Where was that one? That was really, yeah, you had written, Liz, a note about, you had been looking, this was in Tonga, you had looked through her papers from school and said that she had done such a good job on it and things like that. And she wrote back a little letter to you and said, thank you, I think when I grow up I will be a teacher.
And she is
She's
Okay.
really doing a lot of that.
now. Okay. Are
Well,
we ready for Marilyn?
Okay.
Okay. A lot of these overlap because some of the fun
Yeah.
things, involve the two of them. Marilyn, probably one of our early photos that we recall of her is back in the Orland house again. She fell asleep. She didn't like to take her naps too well, but she would get so tired, and one time we found her just sound asleep about 1/3 of the way up the stairway. Just leaning on the stair and sound asleep. We'll have to try to find that one.
the Orland house it was 1060 Orland, that's the first house we lived in Idaho Falls. It was actually called as Bishop when we were still living there, and then we built the Homer house a little bit later. A couple of things I remember about Marilyn as a baby, you know, when she was younger. Particularly when we got to Tonga, I remember of her wanting to go to school at the Tonga High School side school. So it was the Tonga High School, but it was the side school. And you talk about that picture of her on the steps. I always see her with her teacher under a great big, I suppose a banyan tree of some sort, of she and her teacher standing there. And I took the picture. The teacher wanted a copy of it, but I remember of Marilyn just being so happy, just, you know, with all these friends and with all this, and with this teacher, and the fact that the teacher really liked her, you could tell, and she really liked the teacher. It was just a really, that's one of my early memories of Marilyn.
One of her,
that
good
everyone seemed to
friends,
like her, and she liked
her
to.
little friend Nada went to that school
Nada
too,
Peart.
Nada Peart. And they lived just on the corner right next to us. So she
Yeah.
was a fun little playmate, often would come, but they were originally from Australia?
Australia, yeah. And not only Nada, but you know, what was the name of the little Tongan girl?
Tuifua?
No, the one with the crutches.
Oh, well, that was,
Can't remember.
Te Lucia.
Lucia, yeah.
And that was well, for all the girls, Nancy, Liz, Marilyn, and Jane was a little young then, but the first year or so after we'd been in Tonga, we had a little Tongan girl who had been sent here to Primary Children's Hospital for some surgery come, and they didn't want her to go back to her village right direct because of sanitation and make sure that she adjusted well, and she had leg braces on, and so we kept her in the mission home, and she lived there with us for several months,
Yeah.
I think. But the girls were so sweet with her, they just took her in as a sister, and I think that helped them learn extra compassion and
Yeah.
understanding, and they felt really close to Telu. In fact, she was about Nancy's age and had not been baptized yet, so, or a little older. She was a year older than Nancy. So when Nancy was baptized in Hapai, Telu went with us, and she was baptized at the same time as Nancy.
Yeah.
So it was a nice memory. But back to Marilyn, I remember before even we went to Tonga that when we lived in the Orland house that Christmas, one of the Christmases there, my dad, Grandpa Saban, made some really fun boxes, wooden boxes that nested together. They were open through, so there was kind of, they could build like a tunnel. And he painted bright red, yellow, and green. I think there were 3 of them, just nested sizes. And that was one of Maryland's fun places. They would make like tunnels and crawl through them and pile them up, and had a lot of fun playing in the boxes that Grandpa Saban made. Another thing that Marilyn had in those early years was an imaginary friend. And she just was with her whenever she needed her, this little friend, and she called her Susie. That was long before we had our own Sue. But she had Susie there for a number of support issues. And it was quite fun. One time, Dad had developed a nickname for Marilyn, called her Badarrel.
Merrill Badarrel.
Because we would use shorten Marilyn to Merrill, so he called her Merrill Badarrel. And she informed him one day, she says, "No, don't call me, I'm not Badarrel, I'm Basooz."
One of my memories of Marilyn was just how gregarious she was. She just seemed to always have friends, and yet she was she was happy to be by herself and it wasn't a problem, you know, it was just, but I do remember of having that feeling that I didn't need to worry about Marilyn.
This was before Tonga too. This was in '64. So September, she was just before turning 2. She was playing with a little toy kitten, and she pointed out this is the eyes and the nose and the ears and stuff. And she would say, "Nice kitty eyes and nice kitty nose." And I said, "Where are the kitty's eyes?" She would point to it. And when we came to "Where's the kitty's tail?" she pointed to the tail, kitty's tail. Then she stopped and got a serious look and stopped and turned around and tried to see her own back. She says, "Where's my tail?" She wanted a new suitcase, meaning a pillowcase for her pillow. She called it a suitcase. And when she didn't quite understand things, she wanted to understand better. She said, "I can't know."
Okay,
Okay.
well, let's
Let's
move on to
see.
Jane.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, I wanted to read this while we're still on Maryland. This was when Marilyn was 4, November of '66, so we were just back from Tonga.
no, just
Oh, wait, this
ready
is,
to go to Tonga.
oh, yeah,
We left in '66.
and this was, oh, I'm sorry. This was when we were in Tonga. Marilyn was 3.5. And she said, "I wish Grandma could come here, and Aunt Bethy, because of her voice." I still remember her voice. Beth was such a beautiful, and she was, what, in high school then? It's really good. It's so beautiful. Excuse me. I have to take a break on that one. She said, "It's really good. It's so beautiful. We can't sing with her voice because it's her voice and not ours. If we had her voice, it wouldn't be her voice, it would be our voice. And she wouldn't have a voice. Mama, you couldn't have my voice and Gail's voice, because then we wouldn't have any voices at all, and you would have 3 voices." And then came a pause and deep thought on her expression on her face. "Mama, how do our voices get out of our hearts?"
Oh, that's neat. That's awesome. I love it.
All right. Well, let's go on to,
Should I do one
Yeah,
more here?
sure.
This was the day after Nancy's baptism. We were in Hawaii. Excuse me. And Marilyn said, "I want to wash now, Mama." "Okay, Marilyn, I want to wash too, so my spirit can get clean."
Oh, that's sweet.
I'm gonna have to.
okay, well, let's have some early memories of Jane. Of course, Jane was just not quite 2 when we went to Tonga. But so some of my early memories of Jane are in Tonga, and 2 of them that I have one was when she went to Pilolevu's preschool, and I just remember so well of going to pick her up, and every once in a while she wouldn't see me coming. There was kind of a long sidewalk, and then the building was back here, and I'd park, and sometimes she'd see me coming and she'd run out, but sometimes she would be just talking to her friends, and I'd walk up. And I remember this one particular time when she was just jabbering away in Tongan with her friends. It was just the same as English or anything, they were just having fun, and talking, and then all of a sudden she saw me, and I wrote down what she says. Oh, I'm sorry. I must go now. My father has come to collect me. Goodbye. And it was very proper English, you know. And anyway, it was just really, but Jane probably learned, because she was just at that age where they were learning to speak. She probably learned tongue and, well, I wouldn't say faster. All of the kids spoke it, just, you know, just that way. And we didn't bother to say one way or the other. I mean, we didn't say you gotta speak in Tongan, you gotta speak in English. It was just whatever happened. And one day we were at a meal just at our home, and we were just eating, and Jane said, "Please pass the blat." And I said, "What?" "The blat. Please pass the blat." And all of a sudden, it just, "You mean the bread?" "Yeah, the blat." I just looked at Jane and said, "You know what? I think we'd better start speaking in English here at our home, because in Tongan they don't have an R and they don't have a D. They substitute an L for an R and a T for a D, and so blat made perfectly good sense to Jane." And I thought, oh, let's make sure they get their R's and their L's and so forth and D's, and but that was one of my early memories of Jane.
Again, in Tonga, had been having a big rainstorm with a lot of lightning, and Jane came running in and said, "Mommy, Mommy, the light flash bulb was really coming down hard. The light bulb is coming down hard to try and bite me." But we did have some pretty exciting storms there, rainstorms, and Jane liked to wear songs on her feet and loves on her hands. One night, shortly after Jane had gotten into my lipstick and painted it around a few places she shouldn't have, she was asked to give the family prayer, or she volunteered, I guess, to give the family prayer that night. And it was quite a sweet one. She said, "Heavenly Father, bless the food, bless Daddy and Mommy, bless President McKay, help us to be good, help me to not put lipstick on anymore, bless the good, in the name of Jesus Christ, amen." And then in a family home evening also, about that time, everyone was to give their favorite scripture and that they'd been learning, and she quoted Ephesians 4:32 this way: "Be ye kind, one to three another." I think of that every time I go across that scripture too, one to another. 1, 2, 3. It was a fun time. We were sitting at the dinner table in the mission home, and Daddy hadn't come in to dinner yet because he was finishing up his presidency meeting a bit late. And as we were eating, they finished the meeting, and you could hear all the talk out in the open area there.
Hallway.
It was kind of the mission home was built around a central patio, and we lived on one side and the offices were on the other side.
Yeah.
Veranda, yeah. Anyway, all the men were coming out and chit-chatting, and Jane says, "Oh, I smell a meeting." So she grew up knowing what meetings were.
All right.
It's
Should we move on to Gail? you know,
I'm gonna, hold on. Okay.
This was a cute one. I liked when we had only been back a few months from Tonga, and Daddy had gone to a meeting, and Jane asked, "Where's Daddy going?" as he was leaving, and I said, "Oh, to Pocatello." "What's Pocatello? Is it in this island?"
yeah. Well, on to Gail. When we first got to Tonga, of course, Gail was just 6 weeks old. And one of the things I wanted to do was go visit all the branches and the districts. Those on Tongatapu were fairly easy because you could drive to them. And Hapai I was very familiar with, but Rava'o I was not very familiar with. So I called the district president. He set up meetings to go to each of the branches, and as I recall, there were like 12 or 13 branches. So we went up there and started in Neafu, and then just worked our way around the island. And there was a lady by the name of Asinati. She was probably in her 60s or 70s at the time. She insisted on coming along and taking care of Gail. She called her, of course, Kaylee was her Tongan name, and she just went with us everywhere. That was the famous day that we had, I think it was 13 feasts. You know, we just thought we were just going to meet the branch people, but every branch had a big feast. For a second, you know, by the time we got to the end of the day, about all we could do is take a little tiny hunk of watermelon or something. But Asinate really called Gail hers, you know. And later, when we had the Jubilee, that was a couple of years later, she gave her a name early, and not Kaylee, but she called her Lavania Veomo, because that's a kind of a royal name. And but when she came to the Jubilee from Vava'o, the first thing, "Where is Lavania? I want it." And she would just carry her. We ought to get that picture too.
Yeah, we could add some of those
some
pictures.
of those pictures.
But that first trip to the Vava'u district, I really remember that. And Gail wanting to be sure that there was nothing contaminated that she ate. We filled her baby bottle with coconut milk. That was as pure as you could get. She thrived quite well on that.
Yeah. A couple of things remembering about Gail. It seems so strange now, but at the time we called her Gail the Whale because she was really, I think coconut milk really was good for her. And but I remember one day of catching her in the veranda. There was a roof over it, but it was open on this side and the house on this side. She was sitting under a light, and I said, "What are you sitting under the light for?" So this would have to have been when she was old enough to talk. And
I think, let me interject here before she was old enough to talk, and we carried her around and took her with us to a lot of our meetings. The Tongans just couldn't leave her alone, that white hair, and they were just constantly sneaking up and touching her hair because they just never seen anything quite like
so
that.
White.
And I said, "Gail, what are you doing?" And she says, "I'm turning my hair black. I want black hair like everyone else." And I told Keisaya I wanted black hair like everyone else, and she said, "Well, if you sit under this light long enough, it'll go black." And so I couldn't convince her, even Keisaya, when I explained that, she had a good laugh, and she tried to say, "Oh, I was just kidding." Gail wouldn't believe it. "No, if I sit here long enough, my hair's gonna go black."
Well, Gail was
very determined.
Keisaya was what you might call a nanny that we had to help with Gail. And she was a lovely, lovely girl and a wonderful friend, but rather tall for Tongan women. She was quite tall, and the Tongans had nicknamed her when she was serving her mission, Tofua'a, and which is the Tongan word for whale. And we had called Gail the whale, as a nickname. So Kesaia was Tofua'a Lahi, and Gail was Tofua'a Si'i. So the following Christmas after that, Grandma and Grandpa Saban sent a little Christmas package, and in it for Gail was a little red swimming suit, and it had a little whale on it. And they had not known this story, so that was quite a fun thing that she enjoyed wearing her whale swimsuit.
One of the things I remember about Gail too, that she would have no way of remembering, is that we were waiting, the missionary department was waiting anxiously for our passports so they could get the visas and so forth. But we couldn't get one for Gail until she was born, of course, and so on her passport, it's just the picture of the hospital, and it says age 1 day. So she's been on her passport ever since, it seems like.
When Gail, when I came back after bringing John Enoch home and returned to Tonga, I had been gone for about 2 months, and I was amazed at how just during that time, Gail all at once was talking in full sentences, because she had just been saying little phrases before. And she said her own prayer: bless John Enoch, bless Mama, bless Grandpa. Oh, only she said Drampa and Drama. Bless John Enoch, bless Mama, bless Drampa, bless Drama, bless John Enoch and Mama, amen. That was her first recorded prayer all by herself.
What was that Gail or Jane that had trouble saying KR?
That was Gail later on,
Yeah.
after Tonga. That was kind of fun. She, for some reason, had trouble with the hard C sound. And the kids used to kind of tease her about it and work with her. And this was September of '69, so
Just a
she
couple
would have
months
been
after
just
being back.
3.5, I guess. And she just could not quite make that sound. And she said one day to me, Mama, can we have a tutti? Meaning a cookie. And I said, Gail, can you say cookie? Not the T sound, but cookie. And Marilyn was right there trying to help and sounded it out. Cookie, cookie, k. And Gail, in a very deep voice, said, k. Good, Gail, now say cookie. Gail said, k, tutti. Poor Marilyn was trying to help so much, she said, try again, cookie. Gail thought and deciding it just wasn't worth it. She said, oh, can we have a tratter? Marilyn said, Gail, say cracker. Oh, can we just have one of those? Oh, she really struggled with that for a while.
That's awesome.
Oh, that's probably enough.
She liked to sing, sing in her own versions of songs. Gail was singing one day, Jesus wants me, I'll be a sunbeam for Jesus at home, at school, at play, at recess. And then she was the one too, and I think this is really significant. In our family prayers, we would usually pray for the missionaries throughout the world. And one lunchtime, it was Gail's turn, and she prayed, and bless the missionaries to throw out the world. And that's just what Gail and her family are doing now, helping the missionaries to throw out the world from people's lives and bring them to Christ. So I thought that was pretty significant.
That's probably enough
Okay.
now.
So all right for Jane to say that.
Okay, so here we are, Sunday, February 23rd, year 2020.
Yes.
We're doing some more questions on, or memories on each child when they were younger, so.
And
Go
I
ahead.
might mention it's the day after the big BYU Gonzaga game. It was a historic, fun event to be to. We were able to be at the game, sitting on the third row, and
And watch BYU win.
it was a great experience.
Go ahead on that one.
Well, this is a kind of a fun little thing that took place on the end of December 1970. Gail would have been about 4 and a half, and Johnny, what did we say, about 2 and a half. Gail said, Billy, she had a place, she called him Billy, just for a fun name. Do you know what promise means? Johnny said, I'm not mean. Gail, I didn't say you were mean. Do you know what promise means? Yes, he said. Gail, tell me what it means and I'll get off of you. She was sitting on top of him because he had taken something of hers. Tell me what promise means. I am not mean. Another fun one, just the next month after that, Gail was singing at the top of her voice.
This is back in
This
Idaho
is-
Falls, or in Idaho
In
Falls.
71, yeah, in Idaho Falls. She was, we just past the holiday season, she was singing Far, Far Away in Jerusalem. Oh, Nolale, oh, Nolale, oh, Nolale. Glory to God, peace on earth, goodwill to Him.
Okay, well, I'll give a couple on John Enoch. Of course, you're all familiar with the challenges of his birth and coming here with Jean to have the various operations. One of the things that people maybe don't realize is that that first operation was just sort of a temporary fix. I mean, it was a good fix, but it didn't solve the problem, and they had to wait until he was about 2.5 years old after we got back to have the main operation. And back in those days, they didn't have all the drugs and so forth that they have today. And Dr. Hatch, who did the operation, said he has to just be absolutely perfectly still because it's such a delicate, tiny little thing that they were doing. And so they gave him the maximum amount of morphine, which was the main tranquilizer, painkiller type thing to hold him still at the time. And the operation was successful. He said he was just perfectly still, and they did it good. But then when it was over with, of course he hurt, obviously, but Dr. Hatch said, no, the main problem is not going to be the hurting. The main problem is his withdrawal from the morphine. And so for several days, we had to tie his 2 hands to the crib this way and his 2 feet to the other, so he was just stretched out that way, and that was to prevent him from pulling his, pulling the things off.
Tubes and things.
And they told us it was going to be really hard, but it was the best thing to do. And for 2 or 3 days, he just screamed at the top of his voice. And we just had to sit there and just kind of hold him. And every once in a while, he would go to sleep for just a little bit, and then he'd wake up. And it wasn't so much the pain as it was the morphine withdrawal. But they said that's the only way to do it. And so after, it was not a week, but it was several days. It was, and then he finally, apparently it got out of his system. although it did leave an after effect in the sense that when he went to a dentist when he was not, he might have been 10 or something like that, and they gave him a shot of Novocaine, if that's what they used in those days, and he just went through the roof again, because apparently he still had tiny little semblances of that left. But anyway, that was just kind of a, and then before, let's see, that was at about 2.5 when he was only 2 years old, so that was before the operation. I had promised Queen Mataaho that we would bring him back because she wanted to do a birthday celebration for him, but of course in Tonga the big birthday is number 1, and he wasn't there, so she made me promise to bring him back for his 2nd birthday, and so I took Nancy with me, and we went down for some regional conferences and so forth, and took him there, and he had the Queen had a big old birthday party for him, and it was really a fun thing. And then he came home, and then we went through all of this that I just described.
Well, one of the things that we probably should mention, since this is for history, is the fact of the way his birth was portrayed in the movie. It wasn't quite exactly the way it really happened, just for the family to know. The movie made a big thing of having the doctor come running in at the last minute. Actually, the doctor came shortly after we arrived at the hospital.
And it was
But he
Dr.
was-
Nume Tolu.
Yeah, Dr. Nume Tolu, a different one than the doctor that helped when he was sick.
But Dr. Topper was really in
Yeah,
charge.
he was the head doctor there, but delivering the baby was Dr. Nume Tolu. And he was also a lay preacher in his village. And we went into the hospital on late Saturday night after attending the Ward Relief Society birthday dinner party or dance party they had on Saturday, and this was a Sunday morning early. And the labor, well, it was interesting as we walked into the pay ward of the hospital, which is the fanciest part of the hospital. It was just an old wood-framed home that had been turned into this section of the hospital. John asked, or Dad asked where the delivery room was, and they said, "Where would you like it to be? There's a table right there."
Or the floor.
So I climbed up and laid down on this, just kind of like a folding table like we'd. And Keziah did go with me to help rub my back and so forth. As things went along, and you could tell about the conversation with Dr. Nume Tolu.
Yeah, Dr. Nume Tolu said, because it was getting towards morning now, it had been several hours, and he came, we visited a lot during the time. He was really good to stay there, and he says, "I think I'd better take off. I'm supposed to give a sermon at the college, the Wesleyan Ministers College, and what do they call it? Well, anyway, I can't remember right now, but I think it'll be several hours before your wife has the baby, and I have a bicycle, so I'll go down and come back and be in time." And I said, "Well, how do you know it's going to be a long time?" And she says, "Oh, because most women, when they get close, they start really yelling and screaming," because she didn't want any drugs, any pain pills, and she's just been very quiet. And I says, "Well, you don't know my wife. I would really appreciate it if you check her one more time before you go." And he says, "Oh, okay." And he came back and he says, "Boy, you're right." He says, "She's going to have the baby the next half hour or less, you know." And so he stayed. And I remember of telling him after the baby was delivered, and now it was kind of on the edge of his time to get there. I think they call it Siatotai, the college that he was going to, the ministerial college. Siatotai, yeah, it is. And so as he was ready to leave, I said, Xiaoxi, his name was Xiaoxi, and you may told him, "I just feel so grateful. I just want to give you a special blessing. Would that be all right?" And he said, "Sure, as long as you do it fast, because I've got to get there or I'll be late." And I says, "I just bless you that you'll give a wonderful, wonderful sermon because you have done Christ's bidding today. You have helped those in need, and His Spirit will be with you, and you'll give a wonderful sermon." And when he came back, he said, "I don't know what it was about your blessing, but that's the best sermon I've ever given." And the people told me that. So,
So that, we didn't have all the serenading and celebrating.
well, we did later, but not
But-
then.
but
No
not
one came to
at
the
time
hospital
of the
to see,
delivery,
huh?
no, not the early Sunday morning.
They did later.
But anyway, that's, for the record, what it was really like. There was, of course, a little over a year or so when Johnny was living with his grandparents, Sabin grandparents, and he had a big brother, John Sabin, then, who was about 13 or so, I guess. And then when he moved up to Idaho, he had
George.
George and Gloria were still at home, so as aunts and uncles, they had a chance to also have a little baby brother around for a while, so that was a nice blessing for them as young teenagers.
He was with, just for the record again, he was with your folks for 2 or 3 months, was he?
Till October conference, your parents came
Yeah.
down October conference, so from July, August, September, yeah.
About 3 months.
A little over 3 months,
And then with the folks for
till we came home the following summer. Lots of fun, different little things. When John was little, let's see, April of 72, he would have been about 4, I guess. And he and Susan were, this was in the Idaho Falls house then, they were having a race sliding down the stairs on their tummies. And they both arrived at the bottom at the very same time, and John said, "That was a twin, Sue."
Yeah, getting into Sue then, well, just on John, when I remember those hours and days of him just screaming, I can just remember saying, "Come on, little guy, you'll make it, we're pulling for you." And sometimes he would just look, he would quit screaming and just look and just, you know, and it would just about do me in, you know, saying, "Can't you do something to help me?" Anyway, Sue, of course, you're all familiar with the story of, I had a trip to the South Pacific that had already been scheduled before I was called as a regional representative. And so I couldn't really do anything about it because there were, 10 or 15 Sunday school and young women's and Relief Society and primary auxiliary leaders that were going, and the schedules were all made. So I went ahead and just went with it because it called for me to be back the day after Sue was scheduled to be born. She was scheduled to be born on the 25th of November, and didn't get back until the 26th. So I couldn't change any of the other dates because they'd already been set. But I was able to, it did have quite a long layover in Honolulu, in fact overnight in Honolulu on the way back. And so I left all of the 20 or so other people that were going on the trip with me left theirs the same, but got mine changed so that I didn't stay over an extra day in Honolulu and would get home the evening of the 24th. And so, anyway, there's a whole long story, wouldn't take time, but I ran into a whole series of Sues along the way. The stewardesses and the different people, and it was just a miracle the way the flight from Honolulu to, well, before it took off, there was a plane that had to come in, and the landing gears they didn't think were down, and so they had to put foam on the runway, and they held us up, and then it turned out that the landing gears did come down, so then they had to clean off the foam, and by then we were late. We had a 2-hour layover in connecting time in Los Angeles, and that took the whole 2 hours. And so I was at the very back of the 747 and told the stewardess, I said, how are we going to be able to make it? She says, we might make up 15-20 minutes, but I don't think there's any way you'll be able to catch your plane to Idaho Falls. And I just kept after her and keep me informed, ask the pilot and tell him that I have this important connect. Well, why is it so important? And I says, because my wife's expecting a baby. Said, well, is it C-section or something? And I said, no, but she's usually on time. and she kind of laughed, and her name was Sue. And then anyway, as we got closer to Los Angeles, she says, we've made up about 20 minutes. I don't think there'll be enough time, but maybe. And so she said, come with me. So she brought me all the way from the very end of the plane and put me in a seat, one of the first class seats, just right by and let me sit there to be the first one out. In those days, you didn't have the big aisle things, that you walk on to get on. You had just stairs that went down. And so as soon as we landed and came to a stop, I went down the stairs, and she had called ahead to have a little not a taxi, but a little cart there. And they ran me over I was the first one off the plane, and they ran me over to Western Airlines, which was going to Idaho Falls at the time. And just as we rounded the corner to where they were just pulling the ramp away, or the stairs away, and the fellow with his bullhorn said, hey, we've got one more passenger. Can you put the stairs back? So then they did. They put it back, and they went running up the stairs, and I was obviously the last one on the plane, but I got on, and the stewardess says, boy, that was close. And I said, yeah, it's really important that I get home. Why is it so important? Oh, my wife's gonna have a baby tomorrow. Oh, really? And we went through the same thing, and it turned out her name was Sue also. But anyway, I got in Idaho Falls about midnight, and Jean was there to meet me. And we did go home, but we weren't home for very long, and then our labor started, and we went right to the hospital. So we had planned on naming Sue after Grandma Susan Burnett Brunt, who was just such a faithful person. Lost her husband when they had 6, 7 children, and he got killed in a mining accident. And they were all small at the times, but anyway, she just overcame a lot of adversity and stuck with it, and was just faithful to the end. But having these other Sues along the way, there were 3 of them. I can't remember who the third one was, but anyway, so Sue came right on schedule.
Yeah, our Thanksgiving baby, she really was born on her due date, I think, which was unusual to be that exact. But she came with the most beautiful head of dark hair, curly, and it was really fun. Every time the nurses would bring her in for feeding time or to spend time with me, they had styled her hair in a different way. Each nurse had fun just creating a cute little hairstyle on this darling baby. So that was fun. She made quite a hit in the nursery there. And her hair continued to be a special feature as she grew, and it sometimes got a little bit wild. But we sure enjoyed our beautiful Thanksgiving baby. And one story I remember, when she was maybe 4 or 5 years old, we had a activity. The Parsons family were living in Pocatello at the time, and so they came up on a day off, or summertime, I guess. Yeah. And we planned to go out and have a little outing at the Craters of the Moon.
I remember that.
Do you remember that,
Yes.
Jane? It was such a hot day, wasn't it?
And windy.
And windy. But the whole day we were just hiking over these trails just covered with the black lava rock, and up and down hills. And we have some fun pictures we should add to that. But it was such a fun day, and we'd picnic there, and we're hot and tired at the end of the day going back to the car in the parking lot. And I was holding Sue's hand, and we were walking across the gravel and heading to the car, and she said, she's pulled her hand loose. Oh, wait, look. And she pointed down at the ground. What is it, Sue? What did you find? A rock. Spent the whole day with millions and billions of rocks, and she found a special rock. So that was really kind of fun.
That's fun.
Well,
There's lots of other fun things.
let's move on to Tom. One of the things I
There's
remember.
something tagged on Sue.
Pardon?
This is
Oh, go ahead.
February of 96, or of 76, excuse me, was an extra happy day for Susan. She started out rather cross and grumpy. She sucked her thumb the first time in several weeks after she'd been trying so hard. That was a really hard habit to break. Then she took an abrupt turn and started cleaning up the family room all by herself, and then her own room, and she moved through the house putting things away and making her sisters' beds and things that hadn't been done by them. And the whole day turned out to be really happy for her and her parents and the big sisters. Jane and Gail were inspired to do a better job of keeping their room neat after their little sister showed them that example. And after such a happy day, she wrote this, her first poem. One day, Sister cleaned the house. She cleaned the family room, then she cleaned the room. Then Brother messed it up, but Sister didn't fuss.
And Sue really was always helpful that way. She just seemed to kind of want to keep things in order and clean and nice. Well, on to Tom. Tom was born in Idaho Falls, and 9 of the children, the only ones that weren't born in Idaho Falls were John and Tonga and Emily when we were living in Hawaii. She was actually born in Renton, Washington, but it was on our way back to Hawaii. So Tom but all of those 9 were delivered by the same doctor, Dr. Levitt, in the same room at the same hospital, the old LDS hospital, which has been torn down now. But Tom was the first one. They changed their policy and allowed the husband to be in the delivery room at the time. All the others, they wouldn't. But Tom, and they didn't on the last 2 either. I don't know, Jenny and Vicky, and of course, obviously not on Emily. But anyway, I just remember of having the feeling that it was going to be a boy. I don't know why, but we didn't have those ultrasounds and things back then, and it was, and I just sort of had the feeling a second child of promise, and always felt that way about Tom, that he really is a child of promise with unlimited potential, and always. I don't remember Gene will have to give some of the smaller things, but I remember right here in Manifold when we got the first Atari. And Tom wasn't really very old. He was maybe 8 or so. But I remember how all of us tried to figure out. They had these Olympic games where you push the things real fast and they'd go, and then you'd vault over the thing, and most of the time you'd hit the bar and so forth. And I remember just being absolutely amazed at how quickly Tom became so very adept. He would beat all of us, no matter how much we practiced. He just seemed to have that ability to do it. And I remember even in Hawaii of how he would climb the coconut trees and climb the wall. There was a frame like this. There wasn't a door in it, but just a frame. And he literally would go up, climb across, and go down. Just
You probably remember that, Jane.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite famous for that. I remember of having such a distinct feeling when Tom was just little and we were still in Idaho. And when I would be changing him or dressing him on that, in the nursery room there, that nice counter that we had, and he would just grab anything that was handy and just run it along the counter and pretend it was a train or a truck or a car or something, and just the difference between a girl and a boy, just from early on, it's so noticeable that was quite a revelation to me, how they just come with their special traits, and there's really a difference between girls and boys from the start.
And when you mentioned about keeping, running tracks, I remember Aunt Dion, the kids used to go stay with her. I remember of her telling me one time, I really like it when Tom comes because he takes all the rocks off of the path.
I'm going to tell
Okay,
that.
you go ahead.
It was
You go
not
ahead.
at Aunt Dion's house. It was when Aunt Dion came to our house,
okay.
the Iwi house.
Okay,
That was my next
I
one.
know. Okay, go ahead. You go ahead.
So it was when we were living in the Iwi house, the first little home that we had there in Hawaii for the first 6 months.
I was gonna say, I couldn't remember how long we were there.
Yeah, 6 months.
Okay.
And we gave each of the kids different assignments. Well, Tom's assigned chore around the place was to keep the front walk clean. And the walkway was made up of stepping stones placed in kind of a little gravel thing of rocks. Well, these little rocks were constantly getting on the stepping stones. And particularly, Tom seemed to enjoy being the one that would scatter the pebbles all over. And so that was his assignment, was to keep the stepping stones, because I told him, people come barefoot a lot, and if they step on one of those little rocks on the hard stepping stone, it really hurts. So you're in charge of keeping those cleared off of the stones. Well, one day Aunt Dion came to visit with Uncle Walt, and they came walking up, and Tom was out doing his chore of cleaning off the stepping stones. And he was down on his hands and knees and picking them off one pebble at a time. And Dion said, "Oh, Tom, you are surely doing a good job of cleaning those stones." And his answer was, with a very serious tone, "And it's an all-day job."
Tom was just always running, it seems like, and always, I remember it wasn't just Tom, but when they would go to school, he'd say, "No, you you can't go barefoot. You've got to wear your shoes, or at least the thongs. And nearly always, as soon as they would get out of sight, they would take their shoes off and hide them in the hedge or something like that.
On Veterans Day of 1977, that's the 11th of November, and that was again in Hawaii. I was talking with some of the children about Veterans Day, and did they know what a veteran is? And Tom piped up and he said, "I do. It's a soldier who graduated." That was pretty
Yeah.
good.
Tom was always so thin and wiry and just kind of like a bundle of energy.
Yeah, he had a lot of energy.
Okay.
Stop it for just a minute.
Okay, let me stop. Okay.
All right. Well, we'll move on to Jenny. When we moved to Hawaii in 1975,
76.
76, sorry. In 1976, Jenny was born in 73, so she would have been not quite 3 years old because she was in October and we moved in July. But I remember how Jenny was just always singing and always smiling and always kind of laughing. That just seemed to be her kind of her nature. She was just, and I remember the swimming pool we had there, how Jenny just took to the pool like a fish, literally, and she learned to swim like a dolphin. She didn't put her kick her hands and feet. She just would put her hands in front of her and go down and up and down. And it was amazing. None of the other kids did, but she did. She just did it just like almost instantaneously. I mean, it wasn't quite instantaneously, but she just didn't seem to be afraid at all of the pool. And it was during this time that we went on a trip. No, it was actually earlier. When she was still a baby, I think it was when she was still, because you were still nursing her.
That's why she went with us.
Yeah, we went with Sister Cap is the one that kind of carried her all the time, but it was again a whole retinue of Sunday school and Relief Society and Young Women's and primary people, leaders. And we went to several places in the South Pacific. And I just remember of Sister Cap in Tahiti, of Jean kind of saying, "I need to nurse her," just kind of kiddingly said, "Oh, she's mine now."
She loved taking care of Jenny, and just always kept that connection with her through the years. Even before that, when you were doing all that traveling, and we had Peggy Hill living with us at the time to help out, it was kind of a routine. That was back in the days when we went to church, Sunday school in the morning, Christian Sunday school, and then go home and come back in the afternoon and have the sacrament meeting. And that usually hit during the nap time for the little kids. But Peggy was so cute. I remember going in the nursery there, and Jenny would be asleep in the crib, and Peggy would gently touch her and wake her up, and she'd say, "Okay, Jenny Marie, you're a Mormon baby. It's time to get up and go to sacrament meeting." And that just got in, I think, into Jenny's psyche, because she learned to love meetings. Then later, when we were in Hawaii, one of the fun times, we were on a Sunday, January 15th, 1978. Couple of cute notes here in the book. The girls were getting ready for church and helping one another fix their hair and so forth. And I heard the conversation going on as one of the big sisters was trying to get the tangles out of Jenny's long blonde curly hair. they had just helped shampoo. And Jane said, "Boy, I wish I had Jenny's hair," because they girls always had fun combing and fixing her hair. After thoughtful consideration, little Jenny replied, "You can't, it's glued on." Then later that day, coming home from church with a car full of little ones who had had a little trouble staying still for the long meeting because it had been ward conference, and Vicky was just 2.5 at the time, and she recognized by just looking out the car window that as we turned onto El Apio Street that we were getting close to home. And she said, "Oh, we're nearly home. Will Daddy be there?" And the older kids chimed in, "Oh, no, he's on a trip, remember?" And her reply came, "Oh, Daddy's at home on a trip." And then that next, it was a couple of weeks later, I guess, back on Jenny's liking meetings, I took Jenny with me to pick the kids up at school one afternoon, and we were on our way going along towards the school, and Jenny said, "Oh, I wish the days went like this. Relief Society primary, Relief Society primary." And I said, "What about Sunday?" "Oh, yes," she said, "it should go Relief Society primary, Sunday school, Relief Society primary, Sunday school, Saturday." She had it all figured out, so she loved meetings, and of course that was when we did have Relief Society and primary on a weekday. So she always looked forward to what the meeting would be that day. I always enjoyed participating, so I think Peggy's indoctrinating her that she's a Mormon baby kind of helped that take place. She calendared her days by the church meetings that she could go to.
You can probably tell it better than I can, but I do remember of Jenny always combing her hair and even in front of the mirror and looking at the hair and says, "Oh, I have such pretty hair." I don't think she was vain. I think it was that all the people around her told her,
Everyone
"Oh, you
said,
have
yeah.
such beautiful hair." And I do remember of that, or going like that. So I do have pretty hair. I have here that Jenny broke her arm.
That was
Gail did.
It was, I know
No.
Gail did.
Jenny broke
Jen-
her arm back when we were living in Bountiful.
Oh, that was
later.
back here.
Uh-huh.
Well, that was on the.
That was at school grounds.
School, the
Yeah.
tricky bars or something like that too. Okay.
Let's see. Vicky, we're kind of overlapping here, but Vicky was, this again, April of '78. Vicky would come up with her own version of words sometimes as she was expanding her vocabulary. She wanted, for lunch one day, she wanted some stoop. And I figured out that's a combination of soup and stew. And often she would say, as getting dressed, it's outside down if her clothes were turned inside out. At supper one day, we were having V8 juice, which she loves, and she asked, "Give me a lot 8-apricot juice." I think now she would have wondered why in the world she would have gotten V8 mixed up with apricot, because she doesn't like apricots. And she called pineapple apple pie. And when someone is in her way, she very kindly would say, "'Scuse me." Since having baby Emily around, she became more aware, as we would talk about, not letting people that had a cold or something get too close to the baby, because they might get their germs on her. And the other day someone wanted to eat something of Vicky's, and she fended them off with a terrible threat. "You better not, it has my worms on it." Then Jenny, who was 4 at the time, had been conscious of all the talk about germs, because we had received word that Grandpa Sabin was sick and in the hospital, and the doctors were having a hard time giving all different tests and trying to figure out what was his problem. They just couldn't identify the source of his troubles, and Jenny was listening in as we were talking about that, and she said, you know, I think Grandpa must have got a germ. So she was quite conscious of that conversation. And then she thought very deeply, and she had a real worried look on her face, and she said, Mama, what is it like to be in a germ?
Well, there's lots of things kind of on Vicky's. I remember how Vicky, even from very small, she just seemed to be full of enthusiasm. You know, she was just always going places and doing things, and never really. And that's why it was, when she got sick, she really got sick. And remember when she had that fever convulsion? Was that in Hawaii?
I
That was in
remember, yes,
Hawaii,
it was in
yeah.
Hawaii, and you were out of town. You were
Yeah,
on
and
the
we
trip.
had Brother Hogue, I think,
We had our home teacher come and
give her a
give her a
blessing.
blessing and drove us to the hospital. She had a
Yeah,
fever convulsion, febrile convulsion, I guess they call it, and the high fever. Certainly,
I
do you
remember that
that?
too.
You remember that? Yeah.
I remember one thing with Vicky, it was when we were living here, and you were gone someplace. I'm not sure where you were gone to, but she had this, just was really sick and really hurting, and Dr. Ray that used to live down, I don't know where you were. You were probably off visiting your grandma or your mom or your sister, something. And I called Dr. Ray, and he came up and checked her out and says, she's got appendicitis. And we just went right straight to the hospital, and she had her appendix out. She wasn't very old at the time, but I remember it seems like she's healthy and good, but when she got sick, she really got sick, it seemed like.
Well, she had a whole series of sickness, chicken pox and the appendicitis and something else within a couple of months' time.
Yeah.
And that's when she made her decision that she wanted to be a nurse. She never varied from that. She stuck with it.
Well, let's get Emily's, you're all familiar probably with Emily's birth. We were visiting Jane in, what's the name of the town? Auburn, Washington, which is close to Seattle. She had spent a semester of school with my sister Beth and her husband, and they had some children, and anyway, we were there, and we were ready to go back to Hawaii. I had spoken at a general conference, so it was in October, and the doctor in Hawaii said Jane could go as long as she was back in Hawaii by the 10th of October, because Jane was due, or Emily was due on the 10th of November. So we had our schedule. We were going to fly back on the 10th of October to be there by the 10th, and anyway, Jane's water broke that night, the night of the 9th, and we went to a hospital in Renton, Washington, and it was basically an all-night affair, but the doctor that the Relief Society president had recommended was turned out to be the one that was on call at the hospital. So,
But the fact that the Relief Society president got involved was that Beth had not had children of her own. They had 2 adopted boys, and so she didn't know a good OB to call.
He turned out to be a really fine doctor and stayed with Jane the whole time, and Emily was born that
just before noon.
just before noon, so we went about maybe 2-3 o'clock in the morning, something like that, so.
Like 10, it was a full, at least a 12-hour, little over
Yeah.
12-hour.
But I was really impressed with the doctor, and but he had a lot of monitoring machines, and he had me come and talk to him. He says, "We've got some problems there. I just want you to be aware." And I remember of just thinking, because every once in a while her heartbeat would just basically stop, and he'd say, I don't know quite what to do, and I just remember, I said, "Come on, you can make it, you can make it." And we and I really felt she could and would. And then he'd say, "Oh, we've got it again. Okay, now we've got to." I can't remember whether he had to turn her or.
Well, they, because of the fact that the heartbeat would go so low each time I would have a contraction, they were getting ready to take her by C-section. And they had me all prepped and ready, and just before he kind of checked again, and he said, I think we'll maybe just try and do this without the surgery, and then things went pretty fast from then on.
Yeah.
She came normal and regular.
But as far as Jean's memory is concerned, at least the note that I have is that Emily was the only one that you had a baby shower for.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yes, we had to wait till number 11 that anyone gave us a baby shower, and the dear sisters in the Kahala branch or Kahala ward threw a wonderful baby shower for us. So we had a lot of brand new, cute little girl clothes for her.
Well,
I
my
guess
cousin,
the reason is with Nancy, we moved from Indiana to just a couple months before she was born back to Idaho, and the ward there in Idaho Falls was kind of older people, and they just, we were brand new. They didn't really know us, so nothing happened in the way of a shower. And same thing with Liz. With Nancy we moved from Provo, but with Liz we moved from Indiana. Just before she was born, so the first two, and by the time you're having your third baby, they figure you've got everything you need. So it wasn't until number 11 that we had a fun baby shower.
And it was with Kathy Hinckley.
Well, Kathy
Barnes
was pregnant at the same time too. Kathy Hinckley Barnes.
And so
Had a double
anyway, it
baby.
was with one of the things I remember about Emily is taking her. Jean was still nursing her when we went to the leper colony in Kalaupapa in Hawaii, and I just kind of remember she was still really small, and Jean was nursing her still, but we had just gotten over this terrible thing with the ERA people trying to threaten the kids. Not trying, they did threaten the kids and threatening us. It was just after that, and we went there, and I remember of going into Kalaupapa and meeting with the saints there. There were still, at that time, there were probably a dozen or so that were still there. There's no one there now. It's still a leper colony, but there's no one lives there because they've cured leprosy. They call it Hansen's disease or something like that now. But I remember of just watching Emily, and even though she was just a few months old, she just seemed to really have kind of a look, what can I do to help these poor people? Because there were still a lot of them that were missing noses and ears and things like that, and it was. And I just had that feeling that she wasn't looking in fear. It was, what can I do to help, kind of type thing.
She's always been a great helper. Loved helping people.
Mom, did that worry you to take her there as a baby?
Oh, they told us that it's not passing. I mean, because they,
Uh-huh.
people that were there were just maimed from having had it earlier in
Okay.
their life, but, and that was their home and they lived it,
Yeah.
but it would not be
Okay.
contagious or anything like that.
Okay.
And I also remember that Emily went with you to Grandpa Saban's funeral. You were
Did I
still,
take her then?
yeah, you were still nursing her then,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah. It was just the day after we got back from the leper colony that I flew home, and Daddy was so sick, and he passed away while I was in the air. I didn't ever get to see him.
but I remember if you're taking Emily with you, and, cause I had commented about the way she seemed to react to the ones in Kalaupapa, and I remember you telling me, well, she was kind of the same way with Grandpa, just, you know, what can I do to help, kind of. I mean, she was just an infant, not even one yet.
Well, this is kind of back on Jenny. It's kind of a fun one. This is May of 1980, and we were talking about what they'd learned in primary that day. And Jenny said, oh, we had this story about a young pioneer boy who needed to go someplace pretty far away. So he took his dad's satellite. And I said, he took his dad's what? His satellite. And then it dawned on me, oh, you mean his saddle? Oh, yes, his saddle. But in her world, a satellite was much more talked about than putting a saddle on a horse. And that same month, it was we were having an electrical storm, and Vicky said, Mom, what is darkening? And I said, what do you mean darkening? She said, well, I know what lightning is, but what is darkening?
You know, we ought to mention here, why don't you just show that, the cover of the book?
Oh, we
We
did
think all
mention
of-
that last time, I think, but,
We hope
There,
all
yeah.
of you have a copy of this, the wisdom. We've just scratched the surface of all the fun things.
Yeah.
I just give so much praise to Mom for taking the time to write these things down, because half of them, or more than half, you'd forget, you know, just over time. But she's always, as you know, been a good keeper of entries like that.
well, let's see. This is April of 1980. How old would Emily have been?
She was born in
About 2.5,
'77, so she would have
so-
been 3.
She could carry on a pretty good conversation and reasoned in quite an adult way. She had no lack of versatility in her vocabulary, and she came up with the phrase that she uses whenever she feels like I'm doing okay. She would say, she liked what I was doing, she would say, Mother, I'm just so proud of you. And she announced one morning, I did it lasterday. We had some Easter eggs this morning for breakfast. Emily cracked and peeled hers all by herself. Later she said, I cracked my head on my egg. And she was looking at pictures of in a picture book of some animals, and she said, oh, there's a hippopotamus.
Well,
Let's
they
see.
can look through those. I
Yeah,
think
there's a lot of
that,
fun things.
there's lots of interesting things, and some of the other kids will have maybe other memories, like the older
Right,
ones of when the
right.
younger ones won't have memory of the older ones, but they can probably be added too. But it's sure been fun having all the children, and especially having Mom there. I've been thinking about when the children were young, Basically, I was in school with Nancy and Liz when they were babies. And I was serving as bishop when Marilyn and Jane and Gail were babies. And we were in the mission field and gone, all the time with John and Sue. And then as the regional representative and the general authority with Tom and Jenny and Vicki and Emily. So a huge part of the burden has fallen on Jean to be with and to just have a good attitude. And, I mean, we've had help. We've had a lot of good help from Peggy and others that.
Well, mostly the older girls helping with the younger
Yeah,
children.
mostly. But a lot of good people over the years. Was it Sister? No, it wasn't Sister Davis. Who was it that told you when we first moved into this ward, in the 26th ward, and we had most of the children with us, and someone, I remember of Jean telling me, saying, "A lot of trouble now, a lot of joy later." Something to that effect. Don't worry.
Yeah.
There's a lot of trouble now, but it'll turn into a lot of joy later.
That's so
Just,
true.
just stick
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah. Well,
And that's probably enough.
It is?
Yep.
Okay,